And now for the administration's take on the budget and health care. Joining us now is White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney. Welcome, Mr. Director. I want to start with something the president told Tucker Carlson on Fox about the health care plan. He acknowledged that the people who voted for him, who sent him to Washington, bear the brunt of a lot of these changes in the health care bill. And he said, quote, "We will take care of our people or I'm not signing it," meaning the bill. How's he going to take care of his people without fundamentally changing the bill?
The same way that we've taken care of people for a long time in this country, which is through competition. I think that's one thing that doesn't get very heavily reported, is that part of the problem with Obamacare right now, and I've discovered this firsthand. I live in South Carolina. We're down to one provider. You can imagine what that does to price competition on costs. It doesn't do anything but increase the costs. And one of the key points of the plan that is in the Republican House right now is it is going to encourage more competition, which will lower the cost for everybody, not just Trump voters.
But the president's remarks here were, having taken all of that into account, knowing that there's competition in the bill, what he was responding to are studies that showed that the tax credits go to the wealthy or the tax breaks, I should say, and the tax credit doesn't really help people who are just above Medicaid. And he was saying that part of what is being negotiated in this interview with Tucker Carlson, he said that's part of the negotiation. So I'm wondering if that's part of the negotiation, what's he asking for to make it better for those people who are hardest hit?
Keep in mind your first comment about how the wealthy get all the tax cuts. We promised, the president promised, to repeal all of Obamacare, and that's who was taxed at the beginning. So I keep wondering why folks just want to focus on who gets a little bit of a tax benefit instead of focusing on the fact that we're replacing a truly broken system. But to your point about what we're trying to do is to make sure that folks have various options available to them. They're going to get the tax credit. We're going to have the HSAs, which don't exist anymore. That will lower their net cost, especially on an after-tax basis. And we're also going to introduce this competition. So the president knows, believe me, we know who his voters are, and we're going to take care of them. There's no question about them, but that doesn't mean we're leaving Obamacare in place, because that would actually hurt them dramatically.
I guess the president is, if I'm a working class person, you know, and I voted for President Trump, what am I getting out of this? I mean, just as a political thing, what am I getting?
You're getting something you don't have right now, which is care that you can afford, and that's important. The Affordable Care Act wasn't really, Obamacare wasn't really the Affordable Care Act. It was the Affordable Coverage Act. And those people that you just described could afford to buy insurance, but they couldn't afford to go to the doctor because the deductibles were so high.
But what of these studies that show, you know, a 64-year-old, his premiums go from $1,700 to $14,000? That's not affordable.
It does, but it doesn't take into consideration, first of all, the other things we'll be doing. Keep in mind that the reports that you mentioned don't deal with any of the regulatory reform that Tom Price at HHS is trying to put into place. Doesn't take into account any of the other, what we call the Phase 3 programs that we're trying to push through Congress, such as medical malpractice reform, sales across state lines, and then also doesn't include the couple of amendments that we've agreed to the last couple of weeks. So that the estimates, I think, are just not reflecting the true bill.
So in terms of this first phase, though, the president's basically going to have to, I mean, the first phase isn't going to take care of those folks who voted for the president. They're going to have to hope that in the future legislation and through regulation, they'll get the kind of relief that the president is asking for.
No, I disagree. I think those folks will be immediately better off because, again, you're focusing on what it costs to buy a health insurance policy coverage, but that doesn't allow you to go to the doctor. So the real question is, when you get sick, will you be able to go get care? And I think, without exception, those folks will be better off under the new plan than they are under Obamacare.
You mentioned getting care. The president has said, as a candidate, he said about health care, there was a philosophy in some circles that if you can't pay for it, you don't get it, meaning health care. That's not going to happen with us. He's talking about universal care there. That's not, you're not going to have universal care after these changes.
We don't have the only way to have universal care, if you stop to think about it, is to force people to buy it under penalty of law.
So was he mistaken when he said there should be...
Keep in mind what we're replacing. What you've got now is we're forcing people to buy it under Obamacare, under penalty of law, and people are still looking for a way not to buy it. So clearly the government mandate doesn't work. The better process, the better function is exactly what we're trying to do now, which is to encourage people and enable them to buy a policy they want and can afford.
But universal care was not really a promise he could make.
Again, the only way to get truly universal care is to throw people in jail if they don't have it. Right. And we're not going to do that.
Let me switch to the budget. You said that kind of one of your guiding principles was when you start looking at places where we reduce spending, one of the questions we asked was, can we really continue to ask a coal miner in West Virginia or a single mom in Detroit to pay for these programs? The answer was no. that seems like a good sorting technique, but doesn't it open you to the political question then? Well, what about the president's vacation? You know, when he goes down to Mar-a-Lago, as a candidate, Trump made a lot of President Obama's vacations. Now people are bringing that back to the president. What does a coal miner or a single mom say about these trips down to Florida?
Sure. You could always attack a budget for being political, right? In fact, we are going to do so. But keep in mind who the president wrote the budget for. He wrote the budget for everybody. We've heard a lot of criticism, for example, about different line items in the budget blueprint from members of Congress. That's to be expected. I used to be a member of Congress. I used to represent 700,000 people, and my first job was to represent their best interest. We had special interests at play on the Hill. We had lobbyists at play on the Hill. The president wrote this budget without consideration for those things, without being beholden to anybody except the people, and that's who this budget is written for.
But if you're thinking about the coal miner and the single mom, doesn't savings begin at home? I mean, are there things the president can do to cut back on his own using that test? The coal miner doesn't get to fly down to Mar-a-Lago either.
Yeah, I don't have a business card to give to you today, John, because at the Office of Management Budget, we have to pay for our own business card. So it does start at home, but it's already started.
Entitlements, that's where the big money is. The president has said he didn't want to touch Medicare, but he seems to be revising his thinking on that.
Well, I think the promise was he wasn't going to affect anybody, and we haven't with this budget. Keep in mind what this budget is. Sure. This is just the discretionary spending part of the budget, which was a necessary first step.
But he might look at future Medicare recipients.
Let me ask you a question. Do you really think that Social Security disability insurance is part of what people think of when they think of Social Security? I don't think so. It's the fastest growing program. It grew tremendously under President Obama. It's a very wasteful program, and we want to try and fix that.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Director, for being with us.
Thanks,
and
John.
We'll be back in a moment.